Okay, let's dive into a story that honestly has it all. Secrets, power, conspiracy, and a wild fight for the truth that went all the way to the White House. We're talking, of course, about the Epstein Files. For years, that term, the Epstein list, has been thrown around everywhere, fueling all kinds of theories and political battles. But what does it actually mean? What are these files really? This is the story of a search for answers that didn't just rattle Washington, it sent shockwaves clear across the globe. And the whole thing really exploded. It caught fire during the 2024 presidential campaign. It all started with one simple, very powerful promise: to finally drag these secrets out into the light. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to trace this whole quest from that first campaign pledge all the way to the global fallout. And trust me, it is a wild ride, full of shocking reversals, strange political alliances, and in the end, some pretty stunning revelations. Okay, so first things first, let's get on the same page about what these files even are. Because the public idea, right, it was this single, neat little client list. But the reality? Whoa, it was something else entirely. What the FBI had was a massive, chaotic, 300-gigabyte data dump. Think about that. That's millions of pages of documents, videos, court records, basically an entire digital library of secrets. Yeah, I would. That was the promise from Donald Trump back during his 2024 campaign. And that one simple promise, well, it absolutely electrified a lot of his supporters. They saw it as a real commitment to rip the lid off corruption. And after the election, it really looked like it was going to happen. The new Attorney General, Pam Bondi, came right out and confirmed it. She said, "It's sitting on my desk right now. That's been a directive by President Trump." So you can imagine, at this point, expectations for a full release were through the roof. And then, bam, the brakes get slammed on, hard. In May of 2025, after a private briefing at the White House, all that forward momentum just came to a screeching halt. The rumored reason why? The president's own name had reportedly turned up in the documents. So by the middle of the summer, the administration's position didn't just shift, it did a complete 180. The president went from promising to release everything to posting on Truth Social, calling the entire thing the Jeffrey Epstein hoax. A scam, he said, cooked up by his opponents. A total reversal. So you might be asking, how do they justify this flip? Well, here's the official reason. The Department of Justice puts out this memo that basically says, nope, no client lists, no blackmail evidence, his death was a suicide, case closed. We're not releasing anything. And as you can probably guess, that conclusion was met with, let's just say, a ton of skepticism from pretty much everyone. Well, that DOJ memo just threw gasoline on the fire, and it led to something you almost never see in Washington these days: Democrats and Republicans actually teaming up. They started working together in Congress to basically go around the White House and force these files out into the open. And this timeline here, it just lays out what a crazy 5-month battle this was. You can see it started with some Democrats trying to force a vote. But the real game changer was this thing called a discharge petition. Now, that's a rare move in Congress, but it lets lawmakers force a vote on a bill even if party leadership doesn't want to. And once that petition got the last signature it needed, it was clear a vote was happening no matter what. And wouldn't you know it, President Trump reverses course again, suddenly telling his party to go ahead and support the release. The bill then sails through Congress and he signs it into law. And this vote count just says it all, doesn't it? 427 to 1. You can't get much more overwhelming than that. It was basically a unanimous demand from Congress for transparency. And at that point, the White House just couldn't ignore it anymore. Okay, so after all that political drama, what did we actually get? Well, the DOJ finally dropped the big one on January 30th, 2026. And it was massive. We are talking more than 3 million pages of documents, images, and videos. And what was in there was it was a raw, unfiltered look into this guy's world. You had stuff like a draft federal indictment from 2007 that just vanished, was never pursued. You had bizarre FBI interviews with staff talking about finding piles of cash and even a gun hidden in mattresses. And probably the most important part, the files laid out just how many powerful people kept hanging around with him long after he was already a convicted sex offender. But, and this is a huge but, the release itself was an absolute train wreck. That first, smaller batch that came out in December, a disaster. It was filled with so many redactions that hundreds of pages were just solid black rectangles. And get this, the digital redactions were so sloppy you could literally just copy the blacked out text and paste it somewhere else to see what was hidden. A total mess. But as bad as that was, the bigger release in January was somehow even worse. And this is where it gets really, really damaging for the victims. We're talking about unredacted nude photos of young women, maybe even teenagers, being published online. The full names, home addresses, even a driver's license of at least 43 victims were just put out there for the world to see. Their lawyers called it a profound disregard for their safety. And honestly, that's putting it mildly. It was just a catastrophic failure. And the fallout from this wasn't just in the US. It was immediate and it was global. The first big domino to fall was in Slovakia, a man named Miroslav Lajčák, and this wasn't some low-level official. He was the Prime Minister's national security advisor and a former president of the UN General Assembly. He was forced to resign. Then, over in the United Kingdom, another huge name goes down, Peter Mandelson. I mean, this guy was a giant in British politics, a key architect of the new Labour movement. He resigns from his party, gives up his seat in the House of Lords, and ends up facing a criminal investigation. And it didn't stop there. In Sweden, the head of the country's partner organization for the UN Refugee Agency also had to resign. The reason? The files revealed she had visited Epstein's private island. So you can see the shockwaves were just spreading everywhere, far, far beyond Washington. So with all this information finally out there, you'd think people in the US would feel like they got some answers, right? Well, not so much. A CNN poll taken right after the release is just staggering. Only 6% of Americans were satisfied. Almost half, 49%, were actively dissatisfied, basically saying they thought the government was still hiding something. So when you look at this whole saga, the campaign promise, the political reversals, the disastrous release, the global fallout, it really leaves you with a big question, doesn't it? When we finally get transparency, when the secret files are finally opened, does that actually end the story? Or does it just open the door to 1,000 new questions we never even thought to ask?